The periscope lens was fogging at the edges, and Commander Joseph Enright wiped it with his thumb for the third time in as many minutes, trying to see clearly through the grey November rain that was falling across the Pacific. USS Archerfish rode at periscope depth 40 miles southeast of Tokyo Bay, her diesel engines shut down, running silent on electric motors that hummed through the pressure hull like the heartbeat of something barely alive. The submarine had been on station for 16 hours, waiting for something, anything, to emerge from the Japanese home islands. Enright's orders were simple: patrol this sector, intercept enemy traffic, sink whatever you find. Standard submarine warfare doctrine that had become routine after 3 years of war. But what appeared in his periscope at 20:48 hours on November 28, 1944, was anything but routine. "Jesus Christ," Enright whispered, his eye pressed to the lens, his hand frozen on the periscope training wheel. The ship was enormous, so large that at first Enright thought it might be 2 ships travelling in close formation. The silhouette filled his field of view even at 8,000 yards, a massive dark shape pushing through the rain, throwing a bow wave that glowed white with phosphorescence. He could see the distinctive pagoda-style superstructure of a Japanese carrier, but the sheer scale was wrong. This wasn't one of the fleet carriers he'd studied in recognition training. This was something else entirely. "Sound, what do you have?" he called down the voice tube. "Single contact bearing 320. Range approximately 8,000 yards. Speed 18 knots, replied Chief Sonarman Bob Cousins from his station below. "Sounds like heavy machinery, multiple screws. She's big, Skipper, real big." Enright lowered the periscope and moved to the plotting table where his executive officer, Lieutenant Dave Bunting, was already marking the contact's course and speed. The numbers didn't make sense. A ship that size travelling at only 18 knots meant either engine problems or escorts nearby, probably both. "Battle station's torpedo," Enright ordered quietly. "Rig for silent running. We're going after her." The alarm sounded, a muted buzzing that sent men scrambling through the submarine's narrow passages to their combat stations. Archerfish was a Barlow-class fleet submarine, 311 feet long, designed to hunt large ships in deep water far from friendly ports. She carried 24 torpedoes, 14 forward, 10 aft, and a crew of 80 men who'd been living in cramped steel quarters for 47 days without touching land. They were tired, they were tense, and they were very good at their job. Enright raised the periscope again and studied his target. The rain was getting heavier, reducing visibility, but he could see enough to confirm what his instincts were telling him. This was no ordinary carrier. The flight deck was too long, too wide. The displacement had to be over 60,000 tons, maybe 70, which meant, "That's Shinano," he said aloud, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Bunting looked up from the plot. "The new carrier? The one intelligence said was still fitting out?" "She's not fitting out anymore. She's at sea, and we're going to sink her." Shinano. The name had been circulating through submarine force intelligence briefings for months, a supercarrier being built from the hull of what was supposed to be the 3rd Yamato-class battleship. Over 70,000 tons when fully loaded, capable of carrying up to 50 aircraft, armoured like a battleship with 16 inches of steel protecting her vitals. The largest carrier ever built, launched just 3 weeks ago according to the latest reports, and supposedly still months away from operational status. But here she was, running through the night with minimal escort, apparently moving from one port to another for final fitting out. Someone in the Japanese Navy had made a terrible mistake, and Enright intended to exploit it. "Plot an intercept course," he ordered. "We need to get ahead of her, position ourselves for a clean bow shot." The plotting team worked quickly, calculating speeds and angles, determining where Archerfish needed to be to launch a successful attack. The problem was geometric. The submarine could only make 9 knots submerged, while the carrier was making 18. To get ahead meant surfacing and running on diesels at maximum speed, but that risked detection. "Skipper, she's got escorts. Cousins reported. "I'm hearing at least 3 destroyer screws, maybe 4. They're in a standard screening formation around her. Destroyers, the submarine killer's primary weapon. Fast, maneuverable, equipped with sonar and depth charges. Tasked specifically with protecting high-value assets like carriers from submarines like Archerfish. Getting past them would require perfect timing, absolute silence, and more luck than Enright was comfortable counting on. We surface in 5 minutes, he decided. Run north at flank speed for 30 minutes, then dive and set up for attack. If we time it right, we'll be in position ahead of her track. And if we don't time it right, then we try again, and again, until either we sink her or she gets away." Archerfish surfaced at 2103 hours into rain and darkness, so complete that lookouts on the bridge couldn't see the bow. The diesels roared to life, throwing white exhaust into the night, and the submarine accelerated to 17 knots, her maximum surface speed. Water broke over the bow in sheets, soaking the bridge crew, but Enright didn't care. Every minute on the surface was a minute closer to attack position. "Radar contact," the radar operator called from below. "Bearing 345, range 12,000 yards. "That's her," Enright confirmed, watching the radar scope show a large blip moving steadily south. "Maintain course and speed." The run north lasted 32 minutes. They covered 9 miles before Enright ordered the dive, taking Archerfish down to 100 feet while the carrier and her escorts passed several thousand yards to port. Now came the dangerous part, turning back south, getting ahead of the carrier's track, positioning for attack while avoiding the destroyer screen. Cousins guided them through the dark water like a blind man navigating by sound, alone. Nearest destroyer bearing 090, range 3,000 yards, she's pinging active sonar. Another one bearing 135, range 4,000. And there's the carrier, bearing 180, range 6,000 yards. 6,000 yards, just over 3 miles, close enough for a torpedo attack if they could get into position. Enright brought Archerfish to periscope depth and took a quick look. The rain had stopped, but visibility was still poor, just enough to see the carrier's massive silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. "She's zigzagging," he reported. "Course changes every 8 to 10 minutes. Makes it harder to predict her position." "Harder but not impossible," Bunting said, working the torpedo data computer, a mechanical calculator that solved the geometric problem of where to aim torpedoes so they'd intercept a moving target. "If she maintains this pattern, we can set up for a shot in about 20 minutes. 20 minutes. An eternity when you were being hunted by destroyers. Enright lowered the periscope and tried to think through the attack sequence. Standard doctrine called for a spread of 6 torpedoes from the bow tubes. Fire them all at once to bracket the target, increase the probability of hits. But standard doctrine was written for attacking cruisers and destroyers, not 70,000-ton carriers with 16-inch armor belts. "Load all forward tubes," he ordered. "Set depth at 10 feet. We're going to put everything we have into her." The torpedo crews worked quickly, loading 6 Mark 14 torpedoes into the forward tubes, setting their gyros for the calculated firing solution, arming the magnetic exploders that were supposed to detonate beneath the target's keel where armor was thinnest. Each torpedo carried 643 pounds of Torpex explosive, enough to blow a hole in any ship afloat if it hit the right spot. "Sonar contact increasing," Cousins reported urgently. "Destroyer bearing 045, range 1,500 yards and closing. She's got us." Enright cursed silently. One of the escorts had detected Archerfish, was closing for attack. He had maybe 2 minutes before depth charges started falling, maybe less. Attack now with an imperfect firing solution, or wait for a better shot and risk being driven deep. He made his choice. "Up scope, stand by all tubes." The periscope rose, and Enright pressed his eye to the lens, watching the carrier fill his field of view. She was turning again, her bow coming around to a new heading, presenting her port side to Archerfish's position. Perfect broadside target, too good to pass up. "Bearing mark." 358, Bunting called, reading the bearing. "Range mark." 1400 yards. Fire 1, fire 2, fire 3, fire 4, fire 5, fire 6. The torpedoes launched in sequence, compressed air forcing them from their tubes with thuds that rocked the submarine. 6 torpedoes running hot and true toward the largest warship ever built, each one carrying enough explosive to cripple a cruiser. "Down scope! Take her deep! All ahead full!" Archerfish dove, her bow angling down sharply, electric motors straining as she tried to reach safety before the destroyer arrived. 150 feet, 200, 250. Behind them, 6 torpedoes were running through dark water at 46 knots, their propellers creating thin trails of bubbles, their gyroscopes keeping them on course. Enright counted in his head. At 1400 yards, the torpedoes would need about 70 seconds to reach target. 60 seconds. 65. 70. Nothing. "Missed?" Bunting asked quietly. "Too soon to—" The first explosion was deep and muffled, transmitted through water and steel to rattle every gauge and instrument in the submarine. The second followed 5 seconds later, then the third, then the fourth. "4 hits!" Cousins shouted. "Maybe 5. I heard 5 explosions." Depth charges began falling before anyone could celebrate. The destroyer overhead had reached attack position and was rolling charges off her stern. 300-pound drums of high explosive set to detonate at 200 feet. The first pattern exploded close enough to knock men off their feet, the shock waves slamming Archerfish like a giant hammer. Lights flickered. Cork insulation rained from the overhead. A pipe joint cracked and began spraying seawater until a damaged control party sealed it. More depth charges. Closer. The pressure hull groaned under the strain. Somewhere aft, glass shattered. Men clung to whatever they could reach, riding out the barrage, waiting for the hit that would crack the hull and send the ocean flooding in. But the hull held, the submarine held, and after 20 minutes of sustained attack, the depth charging stopped. "Lost contact," Cousins reported. "The destroyer's moving away. I think she's going back to the carrier." Enright waited another 10 minutes before ordering Archerfish back to periscope depth. What he saw when he raised the scope made his breath catch. The carrier was stopped dead in the water 3,000 yards away, listing heavily to starboard, her flight deck tilted at least 20 degrees. Fires were visible through openings in her hull, bright orange flames that lit up the night. As Enright watched, a massive secondary explosion erupted from her stern, the blast throwing debris hundreds of feet into the air. "She's sinking," he said quietly. "The torpedoes hit her engineering spaces. She's flooding, and she can't stop it." The crew gathered around the periscope, taking turns looking, watching history unfold. The largest carrier ever built, the pride of the Japanese Navy, was dying less than 40 miles from Tokyo. Her escorts were launching boats, trying to rescue crew members who were jumping from the tilting deck. But there were too many men and not enough boats, and the carrier was going down fast. At 10:17 hours on November 29, 1944, Shinano rolled over and sank, taking over 1,000 men with her. She'd been operational for exactly 17 hours, launched from port the previous evening, torpedoed by Archerfish just after midnight, sunk before dawn. The shortest operational life of any major warship in history. Archerfish remained in the area for another hour, recording everything through the periscope, documenting the sinking for the intelligence report. Then, with destroyers searching frantically for the submarine that had killed their charge, Enright took his boat deep and crept away toward the open Pacific. The patrol ended on December 15th when Archerfish reached Guam. Enright filed his report claiming to have sunk a large carrier of unknown class, possibly over 60,000 tons. The submarine force intelligence officers were skeptical. No carrier that large existed, they said. The claim was initially assessed as one medium carrier, maybe 30,000 tons, but Japanese survivors confirmed it 2 months later during interrogation. Shinano, 72,000 tons fully loaded, sunk by submarine on her maiden voyage. 4 torpedo hits out of 6 fired, lost with 1,435 crew and civilian workers still aboard. Enright received the Navy Cross. His crew received commendations. Archerfish received a Presidential Unit Citation and became one of the most famous submarines in the fleet. But the real story, the full magnitude of what they'd accomplished, didn't become clear until after the war, when Japanese records were captured and historians could piece together what had happened. Shinano had been rushed to sea before her watertight integrity was fully tested, before her damage control systems were properly installed, before her crew was adequately trained. The torpedoes had hit her in exactly the worst possible location, engineering spaces that weren't yet fully sealed, allowing flooding to spread throughout the ship, and her captain, overconfident in his ship's armour and unsure of submarine threat, had maintained course and speed instead of taking evasive action that might have saved her. A series of mistakes, a moment of vulnerability, one submarine in the right place at the right time. That's all it took to sink the largest warship ever destroyed by submarine in naval history. Archerfish survived the war and was decommissioned in 1946. She was eventually sold for scrap in 1968, her steel recycled, her story reduced to a few pages in naval history books. Enright stayed in the Navy until 1963, retiring as a Rear Admiral. He died in 1991, 78 years old, having spent 47 years carrying the memory of that November night when he'd done the impossible. The crew scattered after the war. Some stayed in the Navy, some returned to civilian life, all of them bound by shared experience that no one outside the submarine force could fully understand. They held reunions every few years, drinking and telling stories about the patrol that made them famous, trying to recapture something that existed only in memory. On the bottom of the Pacific, Shinano rests where she sank, her hull slowly corroding, her aircraft long since dissolved, her crew's remains indistinguishable from the ship that became their tomb. Japanese surveys have located the wreck, but left it undisturbed, a war grave protected by international treaty, off limits to salvagers and curiosity seekers. Two ships meeting by chance in darkness, one sinking the other through a combination of skill and luck and Japanese overconfidence. The ocean keeps their story, as it keeps all stories, silently, perfectly, without judgment. And somewhere in that silence lies the truth that no history book fully captures, that wars are won not by the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons, but by ordinary men making split-second decisions in extraordinary circumstances, and sometimes, just sometimes, getting it exactly right.